You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
Without further ado, we have our good friend from the great state of Tennessee and the 1st District, Congressman Phil Roe, and boy, do we have quite a few topics to cover today, and we will do our very best to get to them. But Congressman Phil Roe, welcome back to the Final Say Radio Show.
No, thanks for having me on, Brett and John. It's you're correct about that. There are a plethora of topics up here. It seems like you're busy in the particular arena that you're in, and then you find out that, my goodness, I mean, there are all of these other things, and it's just an enormous amount of reading and research into what's going on, and hopefully we'll get to the bottom of some of these things.
Well, let's start off, if we can. The first major thing this week was, and I don't believe this happens very often, if hardly ever, and that is the head of the NSA and some of the people from the Department of Justice and some of the other people in the background came to Congress and gave some testimony as to the various NSA programs and to answer questions, those that would jeopardize security, of course, to the media and people as the Edward Snowden had leaked out the programs and whatnot. So we did get some information, some of which, I'm not to say what was right and what was wrong, but I'm sure you have a few things to comment on.
We did, and they are continuing those briefings now. We have one at 11 tomorrow, which will be a classified briefing about maybe mining a little deeper. But I can tell you, Brett, what I saw here yesterday at the was a classified briefing that I've had before. So what some of the things they talked about, we had been not allowed to talk about previously. So you're correct. They did peel the onion back a little bit and give you a little bit better look. And I think for the American people, it's been written and was the first thing I and probably the folks have listened to me on there know that I was a surgeon and operated on people, and we had to do some really tough surgery on people, and you had to gain their trust. You'd have to sit down and have a very frank, honest conversation, gain their trust, and for that patient to allow you to do those things I had to do. One of the problems our government has now is a loss of trust. I mean, when you look at the IRS scandal, and then you have people deliberately trying to mislead you, to leave someone and to try to blame it on an underling in Cincinnati. I mean, that didn't make any sense to start with. Just like a videotape of some silly videotape on YouTube, when you heard that, you thought, well, that doesn't even pass the smell test when you hear that. So it's not just one thing. And then you find the Justice Department has labeled a Fox News reporter, a very respected Fox News reporter, as a co-conspirator of what? And then you have the AP story and on. And I think that's whether the NSA, and you'd like to believe that a 4-star general in the military is being truthful with you in public as much as they can, and understanding that, hey, I know your job is to mine data and found bad guys. I understand that completely, and we want our country protected. But we also want our individual liberty protected. I have become so tenacious about that, about death by 1,000 cuts. We had people die 220-plus years ago in this country so that you could get those Bill of Rights. And the federal government and state governments and local governments have been trying to nibble away at those rights for the last 220-plus years. And I think it's people like myself who appreciate and relish in individual liberty have to look after it. And they do have a tough job. The FBI, the NSA, they truly do. And some of the stuff they have to do has to occupy the shadows. I understand that. And I understand 15 phone calls from Yemen to somebody here. Hey, I got that. But where is it reach, and where is it liberty, and where is it loss of liberty and loss of your privacy and every other right you have in the Bill of Rights?
Congressman, there was the story that just came out about the Fifth Amendment ruling, and This is a tough one, and I understand that these rulings are not always so black and white. And if there was one flaw, the beauty of the Constitution in some cases is its flaw, right? Because sometimes it's almost so simple that when we throw complexities at it, we leave a lot of room for interpretation. And I understand that was probably by design. But here's the thing that I noted in that is you talk about the need to protect the liberties. When you look at the 10 amendments in the Constitution in general, but particularly at the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, they're really a framework, they're a fabric, and while each one is very interesting and unique alone, when you look at the correlating relationship between them, you realize how important these things are, and when you start seeing all of the malfeasance, in my words, that's been going on lately. This is about this Supreme Court ruling, for example. We're losing our states' rights very, very rapidly in the 10th Amendment.
Yes.
The Second Amendment very specifically correlates that. The First Amendment clearly ties in with our voice. And now when you look at what they've just discussed on the Fifth Amendment, all of a sudden they've just greatly stretched the bounds on what our rights to self-incrimination are. And it's hard for me to separate these. They work together, and if it's almost like a military command discipline, right? When the phalanx falls apart, all 20 guys die.
Oh, that's right. And I mean, no, it's not. They're not isolated. The behavior you have in the First Amendment, the right to free speech, that goes along with a lot of other rights you have. It ties in. And for instance, the one I brought up to the press, I said, look, what concerned me maybe of up to NSA, all of these stories, was if you, like the AP story where you were wiretapping AP reporters and people that work for the Associated Press, is that if you squash the press, if we make it so that the Rappaports are afraid to say something on the radio or to write it in the print media, then we would never know about the IRS. We'd never have a way to. And that's what totalitarian regimes do. When you don't have access or you have a state-controlled press, and how do you control it? Well, you use the IRS, you use other means to suppress them, or these agencies out there that walk around the shadows. And I think I think this was a good hearing to have, so that the American people can make their own. But the American people, I've been impressed, are pretty doggone smart, pretty intuitive, and they know that we need to be protected and be safe. But look at what we've done with this. We had the Russian intelligence agency notify us that the Tarnoff brothers, the two guys, one of them especially that had been back to Chechnya, they thought he was a terrorist. And he runs around, they cleared him, and he's off and gone. And yet they're data mining phone numbers. I mean, the two are not mutually exclusive. I don't mean to say that. And then we have the underwear bomber whose father walked in an embassy of ours in Africa and said, I think my son may be a terrorist. He managed to get on an airplane and almost blow it up over Detroit on Christmas Eve. So there are a lot of failings, and I'm afraid what they're doing is making the haystack so big with so much information that you can't find the needle anymore. And I worry that that's for every one they tied together. And I don't know whether the number is right, and I haven't been briefed on any of that, so I can't comment on it. But how many plots were? But just good old gumshoe police work sometimes works just fine. And I'm still not convinced that you need all of this metadata that they're talking about. Huge amounts of data.
Yes, I agree with that. And you could add to the list there the Fort Hood terrorist.
Yep, I forgot him. Yep.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one because we clearly knew what he was up to. We just, I guess, the politically correct police and the military or whoever decided that wasn't important. And in fact, I guess a lot could be said about what's going on with that trial as well. But
I agree with that. Matter of fact, on that particular one, that you just almost, I guess, sort of in a way suppressed that. But one of the 13 soldiers who was killed was a constituent of mine in my district at home. Yep.
And that was a terrible incident. Our cousin was the command sergeant major at Fort Hood, who had literally the week before that happened was moving out overseas, and but he knew some people who were not only killed there but who were injured. And to me, it's like an unthinkable incident, and the fact that we certainly could have prevented it had we just been a little smarter and reacted to clues that we had very clearly.
It didn't. That one was screaming out loud at us.
Yes.
And we I think you're absolutely right. Politically correct didn't look, and I this is about as politically incorrect as you're going to hear. But who are the terrorists that are trying to kill us? What subset of people? Well, they are young Muslim men under 40. That's who they've all been. And so when we're out here making sure we've got your phone record, I'm afraid you're clouding up and making your job not easier, but actually harder.
There's an interesting thing. You brought it up, so I want to expand on that a little bit. When you look at a lot of these Middle Eastern nations, who are, for the most part, are dictatorships or Islamic states. I mean, Iran could pretend to be a democracy, but we clearly understand how that place runs. That the new president was hand selected by the Ayatollahs, and the show looks good, but we understand. But my point is that I think a lot of these countries have been funding misguided education. They have funded places of worship throughout the world, and they've, in a sense, created a generation of younger people who are taught to hate our way of life, to the Western culture, and for that matter, in some ways they hate their own people because they're constantly at war with one another. And it's hard when we continue to do business with these states, and I wanted to lead that into two other subjects here. One is we have a lot of incidents with China with regards to espionage and theft of intellectual property. We had it with the Soviet Union for many decades with all the spying that went on, and that's clearly been categorized. And now we have other issues developing throughout this administration. If you look at Syria, you look at what happened in Egypt. But what we see is a rise of more threatening, more Islamic-type states that are contrary to our interest. And I have to say, none of these decisions we need to make right now are easy ones, because it's almost like every case we're choosing between the lesser of two evils. And I hate to have to make that choice. But Syria and providing weapons to al-Qaeda while we're supposedly not fighting a war on terrorism, to me, is a major, major problem.
Well, we can't. There's no way we win, and when you do that, and I think the just looking at it and through the rearview mirror is always easier. To figure out what you should and could and would have done. But I think if you were going to arm someone, it was a year and a half, 2 years ago, and the reason is because many of the local militias that set up have now been intimidated by the terrorists that have moved into Syria. So I think weapons going into Syria now will go into terrorist hands. That'll be turned on the Israelis or be turned on us the first second we set a boot on the ground. And I think that's clear. I mean, when you look at, you've got Shias, Alawites, Sunnis, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, Muslim Brotherhood, the Iranian influence in there. Who knows in that hodgepodge? Well, how do we sort that, who the good guys are? It's impossible. And I don't fault the Obama administration for this. Nobody could sort that out. And I think Brett and John, from a humanitarian standpoint, we're the best in the world. There's no country in the world that has the power to do what we do on a humanitarian basis. And you look at 700,000 people in Jordan, a country of only 6 million people. I think about my state of Tennessee. It has about the same number of people as Jordan. Put 600,000 or a million refugees, and then here you try to take care of them. We need to make sure that country stays stable if we can. If we can help along those ways outside that, humanitarian-wise, I have no problem with that at all, because it's a humanitarian disaster. I mean, it truly is. But we can't solve it. There's no way on this earth with the American boots on the ground, no-fly zones, weapons to whoever it may be, can solve that problem.
It is very difficult here, because it's one of the few times where I made a bunch of points on Friday regarding this. There is no, I looked at 5 strategic analyses that I would do if I were a 5-star general, for example, and there was not any good answers. But this is why intellectual honesty early on is so important. If we had played Russia better a long time ago, if we had taken Iran's constant attacks on us more serious a long time ago, we'd be in a much better position. The problem that really worries me is our inaction is problematic, our action is problematic, and but by inaction right now, we basically guarantee that Iran and Hezbollah win, and they will guarantee an emboldened, well-trained, well-armed, proven, confident Hezbollah on the border of Israel right now, playing a one-upmanship game with Al-Qaeda for who can bring more havoc on Israel and possibly Jordan and Turkey. That's a recipe for disaster. And so, while I understand hindsight is 20/20, I mean we've been calling this hindsight out over our ski for over a year now on the final say alone. And so here we are in a no-win situation that I thought was rather predictable. So it's very frustrating.
I think your point is right. And again, I don't cast any. There were never any easy decisions to make along the way. I'm not being critical. I'm saying that if we talked about this also here in Congress, if you were going to do anything, your inaction of a year and a half ago created a situation where you cannot win now, I think. And, the Russians have gotten weapons back in there with Assad. He's gotten the upper hand. The radical Islamist fighters are in there now. And I think that uprising was genuine to start with, as best you could tell. But I certainly understand the hesitation of the administration to not step in the middle of that either. We've been burned before, so I cast no stones.
No, well, I agree with you, and everyone who's intelligent and watching and paying attention understands that these are incredibly difficult problems and scenarios. And the fact is, and you just said it a few minutes ago, it's almost impossible for the United States to fix the problems in another nation. Now, maybe we could help one side or another be the victor, or we could keep a nation from rising to greater power, but we can't fix their problems. They have to fix their problems. Now, that being said, when we go back a few years and we look at the lack of consistency in policy in the Obama administration, first term and now in the second term, Iran had the Green Revolution. We were almost completely silent there, and that was the most important country for us to ever deal with at this point because we were too late with North Korea. But we took action in Libya, and then now you took away. Gaddafi was an evil person, but at the time he was helping us in some ways deal with the war on terrorism. So we take him out, and then we see a free flow of weapons all throughout Africa and the Middle East, and now we're hesitant to be involved in Syria, but we get involved in Egypt. We put someone like Samantha Powers in. We're constantly sending John Kerry and Hillary Clinton and others into the Middle East to try to form a Palestinian state. And when you step back and you look at all these, and there's much more to offer here too, but when you look at this all, there is absolutely no clear policy in the Middle East, and I think that's one of the biggest problems. We have no idea what we're doing, and neither do those in the Middle East.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If you ask me if you ask me to define the administration's Middle Eastern policy, you'd get a big dove out of me. I don't have a clue what they're doing, and any time in that region of the world, you had better come in heavy and hard and strong. And I think we have to. I think one of the things, the only functioning democracy in that region is Israel, and they have to understand that no matter what, we're going to help protect them. I think they have to understand that, and I hope the president has made that clear to Benjamin Netanyahu.
He may have, but I think his actions around the world have not made that clear. And to me, that's one of the things is sometimes if you're not going to get involved, the number one thing to do is you put up a fence, and then you put the weapons behind that fence with such ferocity that the other guys know you may get away with that gamesmanship in that cesspool, but it's not just fine. I wanted to turn this. I have a question for you. I wanted to turn this around to something. You had a nice interview on Fox News yesterday, and you were talking about an issue that I think any civilized American needs to really pay more attention to, and that is the invisible wounds or the post-traumatic stress disorder that so many of our men and women in uniform suffer afterwards. And as we were having this conversation, it just really occurred to me that as awful as war is, and I don't know the comparison for PTSD in yesteryear, Civil War or World War I versus the modern wars, but I have to think there must be some connection to when people go through this type of emotional trauma, and then add the futility that the political gamesmanship often makes. In other words, we fought a war in Iraq, and then it feels like we then gave Iraq to Iran. It feels to me like that has got to compound. If these people suffer so much and then they feel like it was for nothing versus World War II, where there was such a clear positive outcome for the world. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, here's some of the data. We now have a situation where more young soldiers, active duty now, not veterans, but active duty soldiers died last year in combat that died of their own at their own hands than died of combat. When you peel that back and look at, and that's the way a doctor like myself would look at how does this group compare to a cohort group, an equally a similar group in the civilian world. Well, 10 years ago, the suicide rate was half in the Army, in the military, not just the Army, but the armed forces, than it was in the general population. So you could look and say, well, we've either selected different people or something the military is doing is helping them prevent that. And we've now looked at half of the people who commit suicide have never been in combat, and 80% of them were not in a combat situation, even if they were in a combat theater. For instance, they may have been at Bagram Air Base, but not out actually as the ground pounders are out in the field. If you look at who is committing suicide, it's young white males under 25. That's been not college educated, and so there's some markers there. And we've got some language and some legislation a while ago, last week, that's going to ask, and I've been saying this now for 40 years, since I got out of the Army. I said that we need to better screen these soldiers when we come in. The problem that makes the screening harder now is that the incidence of suicide in the military equals that or is about the same as it is in the population in general. So it makes it difficult to screen out those things. But I think there are good people who can figure out how to do that. And look, we have got to intervene here. There are programs. When I was in Afghanistan a little while ago, in the field, now we know that traumatic brain injury, multiple concussive, if you're out there and you get hit with IEDs, well, they're pulling people off the line there. If you're within 50 meters of an IED, I don't care if you think you're perfectly healthy, you got to come off. You got to come out of the field. And so the military is being proactive, and they're very aware of this. I've got to give DOD credit, and maybe they have almost even, Brad, too many programs. Maybe I think we're going to start looking at what programs are effective, get scientific data, and then apply that to screening young people going in, and then give them the help they need once they're in. And then once they exit the military, I'm a Vietnam era veteran. I mean, the country just ignored us, and we've only started collecting this data for the last 30 years, so we really don't have adequate data immediately after Vietnam. And let me give you a personal example. When I got back home from the military, I had been drafted in the middle of my training. Had a young baby, had a 12-week-old child when I left to go overseas. Well, when I came back, I had to finish my military time, but I had a job to go back to. I had a family to take care of. I had a purpose to my life, and I think back through that, and I think back how many young men at the end of Vietnam did not have. They didn't have a job. They were aimless. They were hopeless. And I think that's why so many of them ended up with substance abuse and other problems that really affected their entire life. And I think we can do better than that. And that's one of the commitments I thought when I got to Congress. I may be a junior guy. I've only been here 4.5 years, but I do know something about this, and maybe I can make a difference with these young people. And if you save one life, it's been worth it.
That you're absolutely correct on this issue, and I have somebody in the chat room listening, and I brought up a great point. And he said his father, when he returned from World War II, spent a couple weeks on a ship crossing an ocean to get back here, where in most wars since, they get on a flight that could maybe just be a matter of hours before they're back, and then they're just thrown into, hey, go fend for yourself. And I have to say this. In this country, we spend so much money on social problems that the place that we should most or first concentrate on or on those who sacrifice their lives for our freedom. Congressman, we have about a minute and a half left, so I'll let you comment on it, and then we'll say goodbye for today. No,
absolutely, and we are. It's one of the good things about the Veterans Affairs Committee and DOD, particularly those two. They tend to not be partisan, so we have both Republicans and Democrats are focused on what's the right thing to do for our troops. And my commitment is to stay there as long as I'm in the Congress and try to work toward this and to make it better. And we are doing better than we did when I got out of the military. And when I left the military, I mean, it was just you went out the front gate of the post, and that was the end of it. Nobody ever said hi, goodbye, whatever. That's the way we did it then. We don't do that now. And thank you for getting the word out. I appreciate that. I think more information out. That's what yesterday we left the Fox interview and went to the National Press Club where they were. Chris Wallace had a forum, and it was really very good. So thanks for bringing that up.
Oh, and Congressman, thank you so much. And for all those listening, you can go to Roe, that's roe.house.gov, and you can check out all the fine work that the Congressman is doing. Again, thank you so much, and we will hopefully see you down in D.C. soon or have you back on a program very shortly.
Thanks. Look forward to seeing you guys.
All right. Take care.